Hi, and welcome to another of our little series of videos, this time on the subject of modulation. So let's be sure we know what modulation is. This is when we change from one key to another key. And when we got past 1600 and people started to think much more in major and minor keys and started to be finding their way and be a bit more adventurous with chords. At first, one of the things that made the music a little bit boring was the fact that it got stuck in one key and it didn't go anywhere else. So composers started to realize that really to keep music interesting, it's a good idea to move around the keys a bit. So what they did was that they looked for what's called pivot chords between one key and the next key. So a pivot chord means that you're in this key, say C major, you want to modulate to G major, so you think, well, which chords come in C major and in G major? And then you say, well, I'll take one of those chords, I'll use it as a pivot chord. So I kind of go into a chord like this in C major, which is chord 1, and then I say, well, actually, I'll call that chord 4 in G major, which it is, so that's a pivot chord. And having used that chord, I then carry on in G major. So it's a way of kind of transitioning smoothly from one key to the next. And that served us very well through the Baroque period and through the Classical period. By the time we get to the 19th century, composers are feeling a bit restricted by just moving to neighbouring keys, and they want to be able to do something that involves modulation to more extreme keys. So some composers say, well, why do we have to use a pivot chord? Why can't we just use a pivot note? And that's what I'm just going to talk about here for a few moments. So let's take this example. We're in the key of C major. So this is the chord that I've just been talking about. And you can see why that would be chord 1 in C major, but it's also chord 4 in G major. So I can easily go to G major from C major. I could also go to F major because this, apart from being chord 1 in C major, is also chord 5 in F major. So you can see that we could do something that's involving a neighbouring key, just adding a sharp or adding a flat from where we are. But what happens if I want to do something a bit more radical? For example, what would happen if I wanted to go from C major to A flat major? Well, at one level, that's going to seem fairly impossible. Trying to find a pivot chord that belongs to C major and to A flat major is not going to get us the journey, really. We could start in C major and then maybe go to F major and then B flat major, then E flat major, and then get to A flat major, but that's going to take quite a long time. What happens if I just want to go straight to A flat major? Well, this is what happened during the 19th century, but it's a technique that we can still use now very effectively. Instead of saying, let's take the whole pivot chord, let's just take one of the notes. So I'll put that little arrow against C. So what happens if I take the note C and I say, well, if I want to go to A flat major, the tonic chord of A flat major is going to look like this. So do you see what's happening there? The pivot note is this C. So I'm quite happily playing along in C major. And then I think, I'd quite like to go to A flat major now. So I use that C and I say, well, here's a chord of A flat major. So do you see how that happens just by using that note? So I finish in C major and then I go to A flat major. And I'm quite happily in A flat major, and it works quite well, doesn't it? You don't feel a big bump. You sometimes feel this slight lift, slight surprise, but the pivot note carries us from one key to another. It's not the only possibility, is it? I mean, I could decide to use the E as a pivot note and then say, well, could I not finish in C major and then go to E major? So I'm finishing in C major. major, and off I go into that key. So this is just introducing the notion that if you want to be a little bit more adventurous with your modulation, think about using a pivot note to take you to another key. And you can have hours of fun just experimenting with that kind of modulation. And it will bring many more possibilities into orbit and make modulation more dramatic, more colourful.